One. It's a great day to be together. Amen? Amen. Take a breath. Watch out, I brought books today. You'll learn. Oh, and he brings the book up. Means we're going deep. Everybody say we're going deep. Take a moment to just look around the room. Feel the beauty of the space, the respect and the value of community and culture and life and background that is in this place. Isn't it wonderful? Yes. It's beautiful, it's refreshing, and unfortunately, in our world today, it's somewhat unique. Today's topic is about respect. Respect as a virtue. Our theme of the month has been about gratitude and blessings and the justice principle that we've been focusing on from Dr. James Forbes' prophetic justice principles is respect all nations and all people. Respect all nations and all people. Wow, could we use some of that? Yeah? We look out on what's happening in the world today. I want you to just take a breath and just imagine what it would be like if the vibration of respect for all nations and all people were present in our experience. And just breathe into that for a moment. Because what you and I do in our time and our space here together this morning is to create the prototype, the spiritual template for that to become so. And so I want us to begin by imagining and actually asking ourselves, what is it to be respected? And I'm actually going to invite you, this is not a monologue, this is a dialogue today. And it always is a dialogue, I'll explain that in a moment. But what does it mean to you to be respected? Go ahead, somebody just shout out what that means. Listen to. Accepted. Seen, not judged. Honored. Heard. Welcomed in all places. Loved. Safe. All right, now take a breath. And I just want you to allow the vibration of those feelings to come over you again. Seen, heard, welcomed in all places, not judged, listened to, honored, and all the other vibrations that were connected, the ones spoken and unspoken, the ones that you connect to in your own heart. What does it mean to be respected? How do you know when it is that you are seen and valued and heard and listened to and respected? What does it feel like? And take in another deep breath. So we allow that moment of imagination to set biologically and spiritually the template for ourselves to live into today. I want to talk today about the value of respect in our world, why it is missing so much, and what we can do to get it back. Amen? Amen. According to the dictionary, respect is a positive feeling or action shown towards someone or something considered important or held in high esteem or high regard. Definition goes on to say it conveys a sense of admiration for good or valuable qualities. It's also the process of honoring someone by exhibiting care, concern, or consideration for their feelings and their needs. A positive feeling or action shown towards someone or something considered or held in high regard. Today we're talking about respect as a virtue, and a virtue is a behavior showing a high moral standard. In our teaching, we honor and respect each other's differences and all of the ways in which those show up in our religious backgrounds, in our gender and ethnicity, in our paths to the one, as Benny so beautifully said in his poem, the path that is pathless, the path that reveals itself through all of our relations, through all of our interactions, through all of those places, seen and unseen. And so how and why, if this is what I've discovered as I began exploring this concept of respect, the first thing I thought of was, besides Aretha Franklin. Right? The Sunday title is Respect, immediately, right? All right? So I got through that. And it was like, well, what am I going to do? And the first thing that came to me was like, well, that, okay, we talk about respect, talk about respecting each other and honoring each other and how important that is. And I'm like, oh, that'll take 2 minutes. Then what? Ministers have these, I'm letting you in on the inside the noggin here, right? Usually about Thursday, there's this, and then what, fear that pops up, right? Because it's like, well, I could explain that. I could explain this. And it's something that is common to all religions and traditions and backgrounds. There's a beautiful thing called the Virtues Project, which talks about the 52 virtues that are common throughout different cultures in the world. There's a number of different things. If you start researching the virtues and respect, you see how common and how central it is to not only spirituality, but to humanity, how important it is to our dignity that we feel respected. And yet, I find, as I look out, and I wonder if you do too, I find so much of it lacking. Lacking in our discourse, lacking in our dialogue with each other, lacking in our politics, lacking in our care for the earth, lacking in our economic structures, lacking in our policies, lacking in so many ways. The dynamics of respect reveal so much about our world right now. A world in which hate crimes are on the rise. A world in which I just, still have my certain heartstrings connected to my former home of Portland, Oregon, who this weekend was not unlike many other weekends of the last couple of summers, where every weekend there's a protest in downtown and there's a clash between a group that actually comes across the river, a group they call themselves Proud Boys. It's interesting in relation to the Mankind Project that they don't call themselves men. But anyway, but the Proud Boys who connect with this Patriot Prayer group and use these different titles to try to mask what they really are, which is white supremacists and Nazis, and then other groups want to clash with them, and then they take over downtown. And there's been times where even I've been have my kids in the car and my family and my mother, and we end up driving right through this place where our car easily could have been surrounded. We didn't know that it was happening that particular weekend, because it happens over and over and over again, and now beginning to make some national news. And Portland is just one hotbed of it. We know that these things are in many, many places in our world. That bullying, in a world where bullying is an epidemic in our schools, where social isolation, either despite or perhaps because of our highly connected technological world, we are more socially isolated than we've ever been. Isn't that interesting? They're doing all these studies now with young people, with high schoolers and middle schoolers, and they're saying that actually the more that they're on their phones, the more that they're engaged in social media, the less connected they feel with the people around them. Right? And then we have these outbursts, these shootings, and various things happened, and we've seen the profile too many times to know the commonalities of a socially isolated, unseen, unheard, unrecognized person who feels that they don't have a voice. Right? We see it over and over and over again. You see, to understand respect, we have to understand how it operates. And so I want to go into that today and see how we might address some of those ills and concerns. And so we're going to go on a little bit of journey this morning, if that's all right with you. To understand respect, we have to understand how it operates. Respect, at its core, is relational. But our problem is that we treat it as a transactional thing. Let me say that again. Respect is relational, but we treat it transactionally. You see, as a transaction, it's a give and take between two people, but as a relationship, as an aspect of a relational tool, it reflects our commitment to our covenant with each other. In other words, it's a measure of our understanding of our purpose and our power. Come on now. Let me say that again. As a transaction, respect is a give or take between two people, but as a relational tool, it reflects our commitment to our covenant We're going to get into that today a little bit. What is that covenant? In other words, it's a measure of our understanding of our purpose and our power. But what happens when you don't understand your purpose or your power? How can you even begin to engage in respect as a relational tool if you don't really understand what those things are? So let's examine a little bit, if we can, uncover respect as a transactional aspect, what I call transactional respect. Transactional respect is a medium through which, how many people know, I know it's going to sound contradictory here for a minute, because we always say there's one power, right? We know that. There's one power, one presence. But how many people know there's different power dynamics that we engage in, right? There's different kinds of power, and there's one power, let me be clear. Somebody coming up to me afterwards going, David, I know there's one power, but how we engage with it as human beings is we parse it out and break it up and have it show up in different ways, right? Let me show you what I mean. There's common in sociology and psychology, they talk about 5 kinds of power. Positional power, right? Which means you have authority because of the position that you hold, because of your badge or your uniform or your title, right? Positional power. There's coercive power. Coercive power is something that parents engage in a lot, right? Come on, talk to me, somebody. Who's got a toddler in the room? Come on. Coercive power. We're potty training right now. I understand coercive power. You got to negotiate with that little terrific being, right? You got to engage in some coercive power sometimes, right? And then you try to better yourself and say, well, I don't want to really do that all the time. So then you get to the next kind of power, which is reward power, right? Instead of coercing, then you reward, which is just a little higher vibration of the same thing. You understand what I'm saying? Positional power, right? Coercive power, reward power. Then there's a thing called expert power, which is people have power because they are experts in something. They've got a degree. They've spent years in a career field. They have what we call expert power, which is slowly slipping in our society because everybody acts like they're an expert in everything, right? And then we have reverent power, which has nothing to do with ministry. It's not reverent, not reverend. Reverent power, which is power that we exchange with each other because we are in awe. We're in awe of the mastery of someone, of their skill set or who they are being. The first 3 are ways in which we engage in transactional respect. Positional power, coercive power, and reward power are things that ways in which if you do this, then I'll give you that. Because of your position, I'll give you the respect that you're asking for in this moment. Because of your title, because I want the thing that you're trying to give me, because I want the reward, or because I don't want to be punished, because we're engaging in transactional respect. And the thing with transactional respect is that the long-term effect of it is coercive to our collective social capital. It's coercive to our collective social capital being the glue, the bond that holds us together as a humanity. It begins to corrode at that kind of connectivity. Why? Because transactional power does not require relationship. It only requires a belief in the myth of the outsourced power. Let me say that again. Transactional power or transactional respect is coercive to our collective social capital because it doesn't require relationship. It only requires a belief in the myth of the outsourced power, in the myth that you have power because of your title, or in the myth that you can actually punish me, or in the myth that I actually need the reward that you're trying to give me, or the myth that there's any good outside of myself. But over time, what happens as we wake up is that the myth begins to lose its power. The myth begins to die out. The myth begins to disappear. And suddenly, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Hold on. You understand? What happens when the myth dies? Gil Bailey in a wonderful book called Violence Unveiled. I've been reading and rereading it because it's thick and rich, and he's building on a work that was done in 1972 called Violence and the Sacred, and talking about violence in religious context and how violence gets mythologized and power gets, see if I can summarize it quickly, that there is a type of power that we engage in and a type of violence that we engage in by mythologizing or giving power to sacred violence. Right? Unsacred violence is controlled by the sacred violence. In other words, there's a moral gap, there's a moral bridge between the kind of violence that somebody with the right title or the right uniform or the right position is allowed to engage in versus the type of violence that they're trying to control. You understand what I'm saying? It's okay if they've got the right uniform on. And so what happens when that myth of that moral gap between the two begins to break down, it begins to erode itself, begins to go away? What happens to society in that exchange? And in this part of the book, the author is talking about the book, The Lord of the Flies. You remember The Lord of the Flies? Spoiler alert if you haven't read it. At the very end, after all this chaos, and is going on, and remember Ralph is still being chased by the mob and all the crazy stuff that's going on with these kids, right? And he sees, you remember the book ends, he sees the authority figure, the British soldier that shows up finally on the island. If none of that's making sense, go Google Lord of the Flies and get a quick breakdown of it, okay? And the author talks about what happens when Ralph sees the authority suddenly, and the other boys that are chasing Ralph, suddenly everything drops. They drop their weapons, and just the mere presence of the authority shifts everything because the adult showed up, right? Come on, talk to me, somebody. There's not an adult in the room right now in our country. I could say more about that, but I won't. You understand. In the highest office, we don't have an adult. The real question, I'm just going to go on. The real question of our time is what happens with the boys chasing Ralph, what happens if the boys chasing Ralph realize in the underlying moral similarity between their chase and that of the naval officer? What if they learn the truth made explicit in Golding's epilogue while remaining blissfully ignorant of the warnings implicit in the novel? Will they stop abruptly when they see the naval uniform? Will they oblige as easily and drop their crude weapons? Will they as meekly obey his instruction? When the moral difference between the types of violence goes away, the question that we must ask ourselves in such case, is the moral difference great enough? Is it shrinking? And what would happen if it vanishes altogether? The question is that we would either have to begin living more or less in accordance to the Sermon on the Mount, or slide into an abyss of apocalyptic violence. When the gap disappears, and apocalyptic, by the way, he simply defines that as unveiled. Apocalyptic means unveiling, right? So unveiled violence is when, according to him, when society slips into unveiling that the gap, the moral gap, no longer exists. And I'm saying all of that to try to impart upon you today that it seems to me that that's where we're at. Because the myth has worn itself out. The myth and the power of the other. Why? Because the people in the uniform have broken our trust. Because the people given the office have broken our trust. Because the people in the power have broken their trust. And so we no longer believe in the myth anymore. And so there's a greater awakening, and plus there's, while that's happening, there's an awakening of the soul, of the self, of our collective humanity, and we're saying, wait a second, I've got my own power, I've got my own fortitude, I've got my own initiative, I've got my own, I don't need anything outside of myself. There's a spiritual awakening that's happening because the soul is always moving towards wholeness, no matter what's happening in the planet around us. The soul is always moving towards a greater sense of wholeness. So that's taking place. Meanwhile, those entrusted with keeping the myth alive aren't doing a very good job of it, and so we get into this unveiled space, and then we have all of our behavior is in a transactional world that doesn't require relationship. And so it becomes far too easy. You see, we live in a highly transactional place, and it's dangerous because it lacks relationship. It's too easy to engage in a tweet storm. It's too easy to govern by Facebook. It's too easy to enact keyboard justice. It's too easy to shame the other or blame the other for what's wrong in society behind our thumbs, right? And there's no relationship there. It takes I don't have to know the person in order to insult them. I don't have to know the person in order to blame them. I don't have to know the person in order to say that they're the ones wrong with everything that's going on. And it's happening on both sides, right? And so all of our behavior is transactional with no relationship. And what happens when the whole world is transactional? It leaves our identity as fractional, but not wholly complete. Because our identity, all of a sudden, why? Because it lacks any relational dimension to it. If our identity is fragmented, and the innate desire of the human heart is to always seek its wholeness, and my identity is locked up in my fragmentation and lack of relationship, transactional things, so therefore, in other words, what I'm saying is what I think I am is who I appear to be based on all those transactions. I think I am the sports team I like, or the group that I identify with, or I think I am the hat that I wear, or the label that I wear. I think that I am these things because I engage in transaction, because that's how I get respect. That's how I get seen. Are you following what I'm saying? So if your identity is based on transactions and not a relationship with your whole self, I'm getting to the other part, but just hold on to that for a minute. If my identity is based in those transactions, then it is fractional. And because it's a fraction of who you are, because it's only a mere glimmering of the possibility of who you really are, then your soul will seek its wholeness. However, you think, well, that's a good thing. We want the soul to seek its the heart is always going to move towards wholeness. But what happens when your heart and your soul is moving towards wholeness and the repair of the fractioning of your identity as a soul? Then what happens when the only tool that you have is transactional relationship? What happens? What happens is the only way that you know how to seek your wholeness is in a transactional way. So you use the only method that you have. And so now, in order to get whole, you have to get something from someone. Now, in order to get whole, you have to take something away from somebody else. Now, in order to be okay with yourself, you have to make somebody else wrong. Because the only behavior that you have is transactional behavior. And so you seek to build up yourself by identifying that which is wrong with the world, and the thing that you're building up is hollow from the inside. And so you either try to take something away through blame or shame or whatever it is, or you try to get something that you don't really have, and therefore end up in codependent relationship with the world around you. And that, over time, builds up resentment, which acts like a plaque on our collective heart until it builds up and builds up and builds up, and then the heart breaks. And so no wonder there's so much pain in the world right now. No wonder there's so much fractioning of the human spirit. No wonder there's so much division. No wonder there's so much outbursts and crying going on, because we're trying to heal something through a process that doesn't really build any relationship. Howard Thurman said it best in Jesus and the Disinherited. He said, hate is the byproduct of the building up of several things. He says, number one, contact without fellowship, right, which is the transactional thing I'm talking about. He called it contact without fellowship. We have contact with people all the time. We have contact on social media with hundreds, thousands of people potentially, but no fellowship. No sense of, I know who you are, I know your name, I know your background, I know where you're from, I know what you like or what you, I just know that you didn't like my post or you made a nasty comment about. Come on, talk to me, somebody. Contact without fellowship. He said, second, contact without fellowship develops unsympathetic understanding, where we think we understand other people, but we really don't, because we have no sympathetic connection with who they are or what their real journey is in life. Then unsympathetic understanding builds up until it creates an ill will. And then he says the ill will builds itself up until it outbursts itself in hate. It's the biology of hate that Howard breaks down in Jesus and the Disinherited. And so with all of this polarization and threats to our humanity is existing right now because there's so many broken forms and fractured identities based on transactional sequences that need healing. And so how do we fix it? Oh, somebody say, fix it. There's an old gospel song that says, fix it, Jesus. It's bad theology, but it's a good beat. You know what I'm saying? That explains about half the stuff in my iPod, by the way. Just, I'm listening to it and I, fix it, you know, get the tambourine going. It's good. I know it's up to me to fix it. I just dismissed the theology for a minute because I want to get my dance on. You understand? The answer is to fixing it is in part begins with respect. Why? Because to respect something, now watch this, to respect something at depth, not in a transactional way, but in a relational way, to respect something, you have to know it first. You have to know it first. Respect is a demonstration of love, and it's a demonstration of knowing. You have to have a relationship with the thing you're in respect with. You must ask permission to know it and to be known. And see, the truth of who we are as spiritual beings is that we are not transactions of God. We are conversation pieces of the divine. We're not transactions of God. We're conversation pieces. We're not the byproduct of a transaction. We're the byproduct of a conversation. The divine is having a conversation with you. The divine is having, and it wants to know itself as you, and it wants to know itself as me, and it wants to know itself as humanity. In the, let me jump ahead for a minute. I'm going to come back to that. In the Talmud, in the Muslim scriptures, there's a beautiful piece that's translated like this. It says, "O mankind, indeed we have created you from male and female and made you of many people and many tribes so that you may know one another. Indeed, the most noble of you is so in the sight of Allah, the most righteous of you. Indeed, Allah is knowing and acquainted." Allah, God, is knowing and acquainted. God is known through relationship. I've made you different. I've made you of different tongue and different color and different diversity of the human expression so that you may know one another. What does that mean? It means that when I engage with you, I have to ask you your name. I have to ask you, what does that name mean? Where do you come from? Where do your mother's people come from? Where do your father's people come from? What are your traditions? Tell me about that. I have to engage. In order to know you, I have to be in relationship with you. And in order to know God, I have to know humanity. You see, that brings us back to the covenant. Let me say it again. We're not transactions. We're conversation pieces. Way back in the beginning, somebody say in the beginning. Way back in the beginning, there's a conversation that takes place, and the conversation says, "And God said." Now, it's a very interesting thing, right? Because it's the beginning of the creation story as captured by a certain swath of humanity over many, 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 many times of telling it as an oral tradition. And this creation story says, and then God said, and then there was, and then God delights in what happens. Now, isn't that interesting? That the all-powerful presence in the universe doesn't just do it. Oh, you didn't catch what I'm saying, right? It's not creation isn't a doing, it's a conversation. God says, who's he saying it to? Come on now. Who's he saying it to? He's saying it to his creation, to you and I. He says to the waters, bring forth. The word is bring forth, that the waters may bring forth all living things, swimming and, all of that. And that, it's the Alexander translation. And that the land may bring forth all of the four-legged ones and all of the creepy crawlies and all that, right? And that the sky may bring forth the winged ones and all of that to bring. He speaks, right? Because the people reading and hearing the stories, you're talking about agriculturalists. You're talking about nomads. You're talking about people who know the earth. They weren't going to buy a story that said, and God just plopped a bunch of fish into the water. And God just plopped a bunch of animals onto the ground, plopped them out there. No, the story says God said, and they came forth. And then God was delighted. In other words, there's an exchange. God says is a conversation. And then creation responds, and he's delighted. Or the divine, the male, the female, the infinite intelligence of the universe is delighted when we bring forth that which is within us. And in order to bring forth that which is within you, you have to know who you are. You have to know whose you are. You have to know that you're here as a covenant to awaken on a journey of becoming, which is to release more and more of your authentic self. And you can only do that through relationship. Ernest Holmes, finally I'll close with just a few more things. I was going to say I'm going to close and then I scrolled down. No, I can't leave that out. All right. Ernest Holmes says this in The Science of Mind. He says, we are so used to thinking of ourselves as separate from one another that we suspect the very feeling of emotion that causes us to embrace everything in love. The one who loves us the most will live the most. We meet each other only in fragments, only partially, only in a miserly way. And when we refuse to open the whole avenue of our consciousness to the realization that there is but one living spirit, if our human relations are to mean the most to us, we must sense there is hidden within, around, and through each of us a divine presence, manifesting itself in infinite variations, the same impulse of love and life, but never quite alike in any two persons. Isn't that beautiful? And then, finally, I'll close with this. Your covenant is that you are in relationship with the divine. And so to respect anyone else, you have to know them. But respect is a reflection of your understanding of your covenant, as I said in the beginning. And so that means you have to know yourself. You have to first know yourself. You have to know who you are. And to know yourself is to know yourself to be in relation, that you're not done yet. Somebody say, I'm not done yet. I'm not done yet. And another good old gospel song says, please be patient with me. God's not through with me yet. Albertina Walker, right? That's good. If you don't know that one, listen to that one on the way home. That'll take you all the way home right there. God is not through with me yet. Holmes says, if the brotherhood of man were to be recognized and practiced by all the world at large, all war, all poverty, and need would vanish from the face of the earth. They are creations of the finite mind that were never intended to be. God views all as a perfect whole. Our divisions are only apparent. They can never be real. If the brotherhood, I'll add sisterhood, the humanity of man, of humanity, the connection of humanity were to be recognized and practiced by the world at large, all war, poverty, and need would vanish from the face of the earth. They are creations of the finite mind and were never meant to be. God views all as a perfect whole. Our divisions are only apparent. They can never be real. In the vision of Isaiah in the Torah, which means to learn, by the way, the Torah means to learn. In the vision of Isaiah, there's a section in which he says, come, let us, he's giving the prophecy of what it's going to be like when, to put it in SLCA terms, what the world is going to be like when the world works for everyone. Right? When the world works for everyone, this is what it's going to look like, Isaiah is saying. And he says, that the Lord says, let us come and go to the mountain of the Lord, the temple of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us the way so that we may walk in his path. The law will go out on from Zion, and the Lord will come from Jerusalem. He will be the judge between nations, and he will settle disputes of many people. They will beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they study war no more. And that line right there, they will study war no more. They will study. You see, our warring with each other is a learned behavior. Our violence with each other is a learned behavior. Our disrespect with each other is a learned behavior. But when we go to the mountaintop and we allow the law of God, when we allow the law of inclusivity, we allow the law of oneness and our covenant with our own being to be from that highest place. Jacob wasn't talking about he wasn't talking about Mount Everest. He was talking about the highest place in consciousness we can possibly imagine. When the world operates from that place, we will study war no more. Why? Because we'll understand our covenant with one another. And the realization that the world is made up of people just like me. And so I bless and affirm all who come into my experience, and I seek to know first myself so that I might better understand you and share that respect with all nations and all people. Can we practice that together today? Take a deep breath. I'll invite the practitioners to join me in consciousness in this moment, to just take any space you feel comfortable with around the room, and as I invite you to take a deep breath. And they're joining me in consciousness so that there's a collective power of our prayer that is the anchoring of the vision of who we are as a people here. A community that believes in one power and one presence. One life moving in through and as all things seen and unseen. One magnificent vibration and divine intelligence. That is the wholeness of you. It is the wholeness of me. And we are in relationship with it. There is a covenant that says you are here as a divine emanation of this one power and one presence. And so is the person next to you, and so is the person next to you, and so is every individual in the human family. And if you want to know me, you got to know each other. And if you want to know each other, you got to know yourself. And when you get to know yourself, you'll get to know me. You get to know the one that has sent you. You get to know that there is a divine power and presence that is seeking to operate through you and through all of humanity. And so we hold the vibration for respect of all nations and all people, that this vibration might find its way to the highest places of governmental authority and reveal themselves in policies and actions that live out the true meaning of our creed, that live out the words inscribed on the Statue of Liberty, that live out the true meaning of love and compassion and a global family of oneness. Oh, we've got a lot of work to do to get there. But we hold the vision today, and that it starts with us, that I can show respect by moving into greater levels of relational behavior with those around me. Or it could be as simple as knowing the name of your barista or your waiter or waitress or the person serving you. Or it could be as simple as simply grounding each experience with more relational behavior and less transactional behavior. And imagine what would happen in a world that is based in such. A world that works for everyone. I see it. I feel it. And I know that it begins with the smallest acts of kindness and compassion in this room and spreading out from this place. Oh, I affirm in this moment that there are places around the world and the globe of the human family, and temples and mosques and synagogues and places of worship of all stripe and all color and all faith and all tongues that are connecting with this very vibration. They're connecting with this very service, with this very moment of prayer. They are seeking in their own unique ways to lift up the heart of the human family, to make us more connected, to teach us to love our neighbor as ourselves, and to bring us in to a vibration of peace and justice and wholeness. And so I honor each of those places today as I honor this place in deep gratitude for its existence and for the support that it receives. Oh, for this and so much more, I'm truly grateful and thankful. I simply now release this word, knowing that it's done and knowing that our experience is magnificent and continues to grow moment by moment and day by day. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Oh, I'm so grateful. Thank you. And so I release this, knowing that it's already done. And it is my great joy to step into the active service of this vision by saying, and so it is. Thank you. Peace and blessings.